I did love being a hero, but if this is where it leads, I'm done with it.
Oh boy, this could get some interesting responses. Well, for clarity's sake, I need to mention my stance on this subject. Unaliving bad guys is a bad thing. But I feel like this topic is extremely polarizing, and at this point, people who feel passionate about this are sitting at two extremes. While for some reason there are people who believe any supervillain should be executed on the spot, who I feel should not be taken seriously at any point, I am actually starting to get annoyed at those who are sitting on the opposite side too. Yes, unaliving bad guys is bad, but more often than not, the deed is considered a moral failing on the hero's part without taking into account the situation and, by extension, the world around them. Now, in the past, here is the part in this type of videos where I would usually bring out a few famous examples of superheroes being forced to take a life as case studies in hoping of drawing some sort of satisfactory conclusion. While I was moving in that direction, at some point I realized that it wasn't quite working out. No, scratch that. I wasn't satisfied with that direction. I felt I had to dig a bit deeper. I'll probably bring up some examples while talking, but yeah, that change in direction is why this video is a bit late than promised. So, now that we've got that out of the way, let's ask a question. Taking a life is a bad thing. For superheroes, life is believed to be sacrosanct. Except, why is that? To answer that question, we need to consider two different perspectives. On one hand is the in-universe reasoning, i.e. the Watsonian perspective, which offers an explanation as to why certain things happen within the story. On the other hand, we have the out-of-universe explanation, i.e. the Doyleist perspective, where the writer needs certain things to happen in a certain way for the plot to progress. So, let's try to answer the question again. Why is it wrong to unalive bad guys? Well, we've answered that multiple times already from an in-universe point of view. The heroes are good, so they will ideally do what the public perceives as right. As moral paragons, they are held to a higher standard than the rest of us. They will save as many lives as possible, including those they are fighting against. That's what makes them good. But now, let's try to answer this from a publisher's perspective. Villains like the Joker and Doctor Doom are very popular amongst readers. Killing them off after a few stories wouldn't be good business sense, so they need to live to fight another day, either getting away through contrivance, ending up in prison, or left with their fates uncertain, which is just a lazy way of concluding stories at this point. So, now we have our reasoning from both perspectives. The good guys have to be moral, and the readership wants to see the villains over and over again. And if that answer isn't satisfactory enough for you, it is likely you're a long-time comic book reader and have seen this same scenario play out far too many times. Narratively speaking, there are only so many instances you can see the same thing happen without wondering why the people within the universe don't come with a better solution to the villains constantly causing mayhem. This gets further compounded when writers feel the need to hammer home how heinous these villains are by trying to top their previous crimes, leading to some of these costume criminals to have body counts comparable to natural disasters. Marvel and DC have tried to address this problem in different ways, DC's Bronze Age reinvention of the Suicide Squad was supposed to address why villains kept getting out on the street despite being put in prison by having them do secret missions for the government, but eventually it became nothing more than a false promise meant to entice villains into doing the bidding of people like Amanda Waller. Marvel would generally take a different approach where if a villain became popular, they would try to downplay their negative qualities and try to turn them into a hero. Well, anti-hero at best. Venom is probably the biggest success in that regard, while some, like Magneto and Loki, are written to basically have their own agenda, which can often align with the heroes. Of course, there were successes like Sandman that reverted back to being full-time villains. I personally hate what they did to Flint. And there were the truly absurd ones like the multiple attempts to make Sabretooth a heroic character. However, in order to make these characters more sympathetic, they needed villains that would appear to be even more monstrous by comparison. For instance, Venom got an evil counterpart in Carnage, who is a serial killer with no redeeming qualities, and Magneto has a clone of himself called Joseph, who, in a bit of irony, actually sacrifices himself to stop Magneto on one of his more evil days, but has since reappeared as a twisted version of Mags himself. So, the situation at DC is that villains will not reform, and can at best be coerced to do some good by putting explosives in their heads. At Marvel, if the more popular villains become heroically inclined, then we need to get even more villains who will need to do worse things to justify being a threat. Unfortunately, the message being sent to readers is that these villains will not change, and even if they do, there's someone worse around the corner who will take their place. There are so few examples of villains redeeming themselves, it's honestly pathetic. And most of the time, it's because no one cared. That Sandman example I mentioned, after a mishap where he was merged with Hydro Man, he tried to go straight for a while, and succeeded. He became friends with Ben Grimm, was a member of Silver Sable's Wild Pack, and even became a Reserve Avenger. He was a hero from around 1981 to 1999 until the Wizard hit him with a ray to turn him evil again. Or something like that. Marvel felt he had more to offer as a villain, so all those years of character development, gone like sand blown away in the wind. And therein lies the problem. As most of the villains are not showing any signs of redemption, imprisoning them repeatedly feels like bashing one's head on a brick wall in the hopes of bringing it down with one's skull. Throw in the fact that most of the times, prisons show up in comics to indicate a breakout is about to happen, and it becomes difficult to rationalize away keeping them locked up when they won't stay that way for long. It's difficult to look at these supervillains who commit atrocities gleefully and not wonder, would it be the worst thing in the world if they died? How would the world not be a better place without them? So, if the villains can't change, why shouldn't the heroes resort to more permanent methods? I would like to answer that with a question of my own. Why should the heroes have to play judge, jury, and executioner? In the new Avengers Illuminati one-shot, there's a scene where Maria Hill and Iron Man have a discussion about the Green Goblin, and why Spider-Man doesn't just kill him. One of her agents points out that since Spider-Man beats up the Green Goblin, it's up to him to permanently end him instead of just webbing him up for the cops. Leaving aside the stupidity of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents discussing why a private citizen should commit murder, I'm forced to look at this in another way. Why is it up to Spider-Man to specifically kill the Green Goblin? If that agent has a problem, why doesn't he do it? I mean, he probably has greater access to those supervillains that S.H.I.E.L.D. and other similar organizations cannot seem to keep villains imprisoned in. Alternately, it does leave the impression that the heroes should do the dirty work. so that the government, as well as the people and the entities working under it, get to keep their hands free of blood. The heroes should kill so that our souls aren't stained, so that we don't have to deal with the moral repercussions, so that our conscience remains clean. The first issue of Batman Gotham Adventures, a tie-in to the Batman animated series, is about the CEO of a company in Gotham putting out a bounty on the Joker's head for the murder of his son. Naturally, chaos erupts in Gotham as everybody wants to claim the bounty on the Joker's head, and since it's the Joker, they don't have any moral hang-ups about it. Batman finally ends everything by putting up a tied-up Joker in front of the CEO and giving him the chance to end the Joker, which the man cannot bring himself to do. When he could no longer keep his hands clean, the man's own morality wouldn't let him end someone even as vile as the Joker. While I'm sure there are plenty of people who would say that they could have or would have killed the Joker in that scenario, we don't live in a world where they would have to find out. And I'm certain if put in that situation, most people wouldn't be able to snuff out a person's life in cold blood. So why would we expect our heroes to do the same?
I'm not the man who killed President Luthor. Right now, I wish to heaven that I were, but I'm not.